What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Tuesday, August 10th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay, guys, we have a 13-game slate tonight. Pretty much all the picks from yesterday crushed it, so hopefully we can continue that momentum into today. So let's get into the pitcher position. I like Max Scherzer with a 4% pitching advantage over the Philadelphia Phillies. Max Scherzer is only giving up a .626 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 5 righties here tonight. Now, the reason that I like this pick is because the Phillies have only hit 35 of his last 192 pitches. That's a 182 batting average and a huge sample size. He's 10,600 FanDuel salary, 400 more on DraftKings, projected at 31 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 2.75. His record is 9-4 on the season, pitching an average of 95 pitches per game, averaging 41 fantasy points per game. He scored 55, 40, and 33 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 8 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Max Scherzer here versus the Philadelphia Phillies. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like CJ Cron with a 23% batting advantage over Jake Odorizzi. CJ Cron is batting 13% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .894 OPS versus righties. And Jake Odorizzi, he's pitching his worst ball versus righty batters, 11% worse than his pitch to lefties, giving up a .949 OPS versus righties. And CJ Cron is 2 for 6, batting a .333 batting average and a 1.262 OPS versus Odorizzi. One of those 2 hits is for a home run. He's 3,500 FanDuel salary. He's 600 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. This guy has been on an absolute tear. He's been on just blazing fire here, scoring 55, 25, and 57 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I'm going to ride the hot hand. So I like CJ Cron here versus Jake Odorizzi. Now I also like Jonathan Schoop with a 28% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Keegan Aiken. Jonathan Schoop, he's batting 15% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .883 OPS versus lefties. And Keegan Aiken, he throws 13% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .844 OPS versus righties. Now Jonathan Schoop, he's 1 for 1 versus Aiken with a 2 OPS. He's 3,400 FanDuel salary, 1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 6, and 6 fantasy points in his last 3 games. Now I also like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jonathan Schoop here versus Keegan Aiken. Now Brandon Belt, he's been on a tear. I'm just going to go over him real quick. I'm not super hot on him tonight, but he's just been doing really well the past few games. And he's pretty low salary on FanDuel. So Brandon Belt, He has a 21% batting advantage over Zach Gallen, and Brandon Belt is batting 19% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.006 OPS versus righties. Now, Zach Gallen, he pitches pretty well versus lefties, only giving up a .664 OPS versus lefties. And the reason that I'm kind of leery about this pick is because Brandon Belt is 1 for 9 versus Gallen. That's a 1.11 batting average. But he is only $2,800 FanDuel salary. Now he's $1,700 more on DraftKings, so probably not going to play him on DraftKings, but I love that FanDuel price. He's averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's been on fire, scoring 22, 47, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Brandon Belt on FanDuel here versus Zach Gallen. Now I also like Jeimer Candelario with a 39% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Keegan Aiken. Jeimer Candelario is batting 16% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .942 OPS versus lefties. And Keegan Aiken, he throws his worst ball versus switch hitters, 23% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.020 OPS versus switch hitters. Now there's no at-bats versus Aiken yet, but I like this pick because Jeimer Candelario is only $2,800 FanDuel salary. He's $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season, and he scored 19, 9, and 7 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game, 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jeimer Candelario here versus Keegan Aiken. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Jonathan India with a 41% batting advantage over Drew Smyly. Jonathan India is batting 12% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .947 OPS versus lefties. And Drew Smyly, he throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 29% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .768 OPS versus righties. Jonathan India is 2 for 3 with a 1.334 OPS versus Smyly. He's $3,800 FanDuel salary, $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 21, 0, and 22 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Jonathan India here versus Drew Smyly. Okay, now here's a value play for you. I like Rob Refsnyder with a 42% batting advantage over Dallas Keuchel. Rob Refsnyder is batting 38% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .846 OPS versus lefties. And Dallas Keuchel, he's giving up a .628 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Rob Refsnyder is 3 for 8, batting a .375 batting average and a .875 OPS versus Keuchel. He's only $2,500 FanDuel salary and $100 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites. He's projected at 12 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 3, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Rob Refsnyder here versus Dallas Keuchel.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to DraftDashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. Here's a value play for you. I like Abraham Toro with a 47% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Kolby Allard. Abraham Toro is batting 15% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .737 OPS versus lefties. And Kolby Allard, he pitches his worst ball by far to switch hitters. 32% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.065 OPS versus switch hitters. Now, Abraham Toro is 2 for 2 with a 2.5 OPS versus Allard, and he's only $2,700 FanDuel salary. He's $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 16, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Abraham Toro here versus Kolby Allard. Now, in that same game, if you want to stack this guy on in your lineup, I like Kyle Seager with a 6% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Kolby Allard. Kyle Seager is batting a .712 OPS versus lefties, and Kolby Allard is giving up a .789 OPS versus lefties. So the reason that this pick is interesting is because Kyle Seager is 4 for 11, batting a .364 batting average and a 1.326 OPS versus Allard. 2 of those 4 hits are for home runs. He's $3,600 FanDuel salary, $900 more on DraftKings, projected at 13 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 28, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Kyle Seager here versus Kolby Allard. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. Really not much that I like at this position. So I do like Xander Bogaerts, and he's batting against Luis Patino. Xander Bogaerts is batting a .833 OPS versus righties. Luis Patino is giving up a .745 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Patino yet. And Xander Bogaerts is $3,400 FanDuel salary. He's $2,100 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 12, 0, and 7 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Xander Bogaerts here versus Luis Patino. Now, the other player that's eligible at shortstop, who's in a pretty good spot, is Jorge Polanco with a 22% batting advantage over Dallas Keuchel. Jorge Polanco bats 8% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .774 OPS versus lefties. And Dallas Keuchel, he throws his worst ball versus switch hitters, 14% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .719 OPS versus switch hitters. So I like this pick because Jorge Polanco is 5 for 17. That's a .294 batting average. Now, his OPS versus Keuchel isn't very good, only a .588, because all of those 5 hits were singles, but he's hitting the ball pretty well versus Keuchel. So he's in a good spot, and he's $3,500 FanDuel salary, and he's 100 less on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. He's projected at 12.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 47, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jorge Polanco here versus Dallas Keuchel. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. So there's 3 studs right at the top that I like here. Aaron Judge, JD Martinez, and Nick Castellanos. All 3 of these guys are in good spots in high-scoring games. And out of the 3 of these, I would probably go with Aaron Judge, who's got a 21% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Daniel Lynch. Aaron Judge is batting 9% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .933 OPS versus lefties. And Daniel Lynch, he pitches 13% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .826 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Lynch yet, and Aaron Judge is $4,300 FanDuel salary. He's $900 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.1 fantasy points here tonight. He's averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 3, and 25 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game, so I like Aaron Judge here versus Daniel Lynch. Now, this guy was a super hit pick from yesterday, and he's in a good spot again here tonight. I like Eloy Jimenez with a 94% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Griffin Jax. Eloy Jimenez, he's batting 64% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.304 OPS versus righties. And Griffin Jax, he throws his worst ball by far to righty batters, 31% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .973 OPS versus righties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Jax yet, and Eloy Jimenez is $3,400 FanDuel salary. He's $1,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 16 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 51, 54, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Eloy Jimenez here versus Griffin Jax. Okay, now here's a value play for you. I like Connor Joe with a 40% batting advantage over Jake Odorizzi. Connor Joe is batting 29% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .995 OPS versus righties. And Jake Odorizzi, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 11% worse than his pitch to lefties, giving up a .949 OPS versus righties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Odorizzi yet, and Connor Joe is only $2,500 FanDuel salary, and he's $100 less on DraftKings, projected at 9.1 fantasy points here tonight. Now, he's only averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season, but he scored 41, 20, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Connor Joe as a value play here versus Jake Odorizzi.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to DraftDashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.